All right, thank you everybody for joining us at the first, hopefully annual Thank God for Bitcoin conference. I'm one of the co-authors, Thank God for Bitcoin, along with 7 other co-authors. And I come from Tampa, so my name is Gabe Higgins. I'll be the moderator for this excellent panel, so I'll let everybody introduce themselves briefly.
Hello. Oh, there we are. Hey, everybody. My name is Jeff Ross. I am a former physician and a fund manager. I'm based out of Colorado Springs. I've been a Christian for a very long time. Really excited to be here sharing faith and talking about Bitcoin with you guys. I think Bitcoin is a literally revolutionary technology. It's simply better money for a better world. It's an equitable money, and I just really appreciate that. So. Really happy to be here, talk macro with these guys, and talk about the effect of Bitcoin on the church and the future of the world for the better. So thanks for having me.
Hey, Preston Pysh, podcaster, talking anything investing related, and Christian, Protestant, and yeah, very excited to be here. I just want to thank everybody who put this on and invited me.
Tim Fox. I'm a Presbyterian pastor of a very not mega church in Austin, and I teach online and do a lot of admin for a seminary in Fort Lauderdale, and I was a missionary for a couple of years back in the day too.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you. So we gotta blow through some lots of topics of discussion. In mentioning how Bitcoin's going to benefit the church, we had been emailing back and forth on trying to decide what do we even mean by church. That's maybe a question we can start diving into and forking from there. So Tim, I think you have some thoughts on this.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of us today have thrown around the word, the church this, the church that, and I think sometimes it's helpful to articulate whether we're talking about the church in terms of it being Christians who are out kind of doing their own thing in the world, versus the church as an institution, which has its own balance sheet, its own leadership, its own confessions, and kind of boundaries around itself. I would talk and think a lot differently about Bitcoin depending on which one of those we are talking about. Particularly as a Protestant, I'm very sensitive to not adding to God's rules in the Bible, and so I'm really careful as a pastor, speaking officially for my church, to not tell people you must go do this or to sound like you must go do this, because I think a big important principle of the New Testament is that God is in charge of our conscience, and that I, as a pastor, cannot impose on people things that the Bible does not speak clearly to, and that there's a lot of gray areas that Christians can charitably disagree about. And I think Bitcoin is probably one of those things, even though we all love Bitcoin and think it's wonderful and great. And so, I don't get up and preach sermons about, hey, you all need to go out and download Strike or whatever. But one-on-one, in a more informal context, maybe would push more of those things that way. So I just think it's helpful to think in terms of individuals versus institutions, and there's different things about both of those for Bitcoin, I think.
Yeah, good point. So when we're talking about the church, what are some of the main issues from an economic perspective that you think the church needs to be concerned with, especially given the macro events going on that we're seeing that Preston and Jeff, you talk about a lot. What should they be paying attention to besides obviously Bitcoin?
My opinion, if I was going to take a macro look and analyze the balance sheets of churches today, I would assume that you have a lot of very conservative management of just whatever the composition of whatever type of retained earnings the church has. And I think that approach has served all churches very well over the last 40 years, just because when you're in an environment where fixed income yields are going down for 40 years, you can really get away with that conservative approach having so much fixed income on your balance sheet, and it's just appreciating in value as that's happening. But I think if there was a message that I would challenge anybody managing those balance sheets and those retained earnings of the church moving forward, is I think that they have to be open first to the idea that maybe a different approach is on the horizon that's going to need to be taken in order to preserve that buying power that currently sits there, and all of that treasury that everybody within those congregations have donated to and built up in order to just preserve that. Because in my opinion, I think Jeff would agree, what's on the horizon is an erosion of that buying power if you don't act. And I think my message to those leaders and those people that are managing those funds is you don't even need to act in a big way to really be able to preserve it. Like the argument I make today is even a 1% allocation into whatever your portfolio size is going to preserve whatever buying power is there collectively of the 100% of the portfolio. So I think the message that I would have for church leadership and also the financial advisors is, be open to something that's different. Ask yourself the hard, critical question of what's changing, why is it changing, and then what can we do to still, I would say, take a conservative approach to managing that treasury, but do it in a way that you gradually step it so that you're retaining that purchasing power as what I believe we're evolving into a completely different monetary standard here in the coming decade.
Yeah, Jeff, how do you see how speaking to Preston's point, what does that look like? What is the economic landscape looking so kind of dire right now?
Yeah, remind me of that, because I wanted to go back to what Preston was saying too. This is such an interesting issue for people, for Christians and for the church in general, because Christians tend to shy away from talking about money. It almost feels like it's this kind of taboo topic, right? Because you can't serve God and money, and the root of money the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, right? So those two verses, I think, go in the minds of a lot of Christians. We don't like thinking about money. But when you have a money that is inherently poor, I'll say, or immoral, like I do think government fiat is currently, if you have a depreciating currency like the dollar, that forces churches who are given, people tithe, they make offerings to their church. The church leadership has to decide what to do with this money. And this money is like a melting ice cube, to Michael Saylor's point. It's depreciating constantly. So church leaders have to actually go beyond just thinking about money, and they have to start thinking, well, how do we preserve this purchasing power to grow our church? How do we preserve this purchasing power to support missionaries throughout the world? And so what I tell people all the time is, look, I'm an investment advisor, I'm a fund manager. People come to me, and I'm based in Colorado Springs, so there's a lot of Christian organizations that are based in Colorado Springs. They come to me and they say, look, we have these, $10 million, several $1 million. We want to support people, but we're watching the balance go down, 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 and expenses are going up over time. What can we do? They have to think about, how do I invest in stocks? How do I invest in bonds, which are just return-free risk, as Preston is alluding to? How do I invest in commodities? How do I invest in real estate? Church people that's not their area of expertise, right? They want to spread the gospel. They want to grow the church for the glory of God. And so they have to think about these other investment alternatives, and I would argue that is not what church leaders should be thinking about. If we simply had a better money that didn't depreciate in value, but actually appreciated in value over time and was a true store of value over time, you can plan 10, 20, 30, 50 years out from now. You can't do that with the US dollar. And so that's why I'm such a big fan of Bitcoin in general, because you don't have to think. People like me, investment advisors, fund managers, Bitcoin is going to put me out of business, and I think that's fantastic. I love teaching people, thank you. I love teaching people about Bitcoin because you don't need to think about this whole circus, this fiat circus that comes from Wall Street direct to us. It's just literally to benefit those people and to take money and purchasing power away from the masses. And so Bitcoin reverses that. It flips it on its head. It gives the power back to the people. And it's for people who just know about working hard, saving money. They can actually take care of their families for generations. And I'm really off topic right now. Macro. So what do I think about the macro view? We can riff on this just a little bit. If for people who know me on Twitter and stuff, I'm really bearish. We're in a really ugly situation right now. We're seeing a depreciating, a decelerating economy. I think inflation, obviously, it's super high. It's all everybody's talking about. I think it's going to decelerate over this year, but still remain very high. I think the Federal Reserve is tightening at exactly the wrong point. Whenever they do this, it pushes us into a recession. They're trying to cool the economy off. They're slowing things down. So if you hold things like stocks and bonds and real estate and things like that you can buy in your brokerage account, we're going to see the value of all these things go down. If you're a church that has these kind of things on your balance sheet, you're going to see the value of all these things go down. And again, it makes it much harder to plan for the future when that's going on. So anyways, eventually Bitcoin is going to be the world's safe haven asset. It isn't there yet. It's still acting like a little tech stock. It's down again today, going down with the broader market. Someday it will be seen as the world's reserve asset, the safe haven asset, similar to how the US dollar is right now. And it will make it very, very easy for churches to simply just buy, hold, forget about daily price movements, and you can start planning for decades to come. Sorry, I took a ton of time.
No, that was excellent. And I want to piggyback on some of the thoughts you said about how churches under a fiat standard are succumb to the same kind of perverse incentives, right? So, Tim, I'd like to get your thoughts on what are some of those perverse incentives and how does that change the dynamics of what a church should be focused on rather than what they have to be focused on because of the fiat?
Let me think about that. Yeah, I mean, I think you have, like I was emailing these guys, you have entire denominations in the US that have effectively become real estate companies where they're completely dead spiritually, but they're loaded with wealth and they can just survive by selling off buildings or renting them out or turning them into event centers. And so, yeah, would I like it if my church had a lot more money and wealth and we could preserve it all into the future? Like, yeah, that would be great. And I think most churches, that would be good for them. But, I mean, there's a reason that Jesus repeatedly warns us about the danger of being rich. And we all think about money a lot, and we know kind of how to disarm people and say, no, money's not evil, money's not bad, it's important, God cares about it. But there is a danger there. And there is a danger of turning God into a means to an end, of you're there to kind of give me what I want and help me with what I want. I think kind of more on the kind of individual Christian level in terms of the fiat world we're in, at least in my kind of worlds I cruise around in, whether it's outrightly or just kind of implicitly, I think a lot of them are kind of just have this Dave Ramsey baby boomer mindset, and the American church is very dominated by people that have really benefited from the last few decades of the financial system, and it's really worked for them, and they've done well. And to them, it's really hard for them to see why would you change this, and how could the party ever end? I imagine and I suspect that churches in other places around the world will catch on to this much faster than American churches will, for the same reasons, just more broadly culturally. And so, I don't know, we do what we can, but I think most people are kind of like, what? What are you talking about? There's no problem here.
I've got a trick, should I say that? If you've got a church and you're wanting them to have Bitcoin on whatever their treasury is, I've got a story I'm going to just share something that my wife and I, who actually moved up in the row. She was way in the back there. She was hiding out in the back, but she moved up. So she's involved in a nonprofit. And similar to the church, it's not a Christian nonprofit, but she came to me and she says, we're just not, our treasury isn't growing at all. And this was her way of telling me, I think you should take over the financial management of the nonprofit. And I thought for a minute and I said, oh, okay, let me think on that, right? And I was like, how about I do something a little bit different that doesn't involve my time and me having to be there every step of the way, kind of like calling the shots, and then everybody second guessing every decision you make. And Jeff is well aware of that business, and that's why I do podcasting and not that. That's hard. Everyone's got an opinion, right? Well, I went back to my wife and I said, how about this? How about I came up with this strategy of, why don't we donate some Bitcoin to the nonprofit, but we do it in a way that the nonprofit has to agree that they have to hold the Bitcoin deposit for 5 years before they're allowed to do anything with it, right? And so my opinion is that based on historical performance, let's pull that forward, right? The donation was going to match their treasury within that 5 years, or maybe even exceed it within 5 years. And in a very indirect way, I'm effectively managing their treasury without me having to show up and have somebody second guess or anything, right? And more importantly, it's orange pilling the entire organization as to what in the world is this sitting on our balance sheet that we have to keep reporting what it is. Now, I donated it at $69,000, and it's down right now, right? So they're probably thinking that was the dumbest deposit that's ever been made in the nonprofit's history. But I think with a little bit more time, it's going to do its thing. And I think that and we did it in a way that they had to take possession of the private keys. It's a multi-sig, and it's just sitting there, right? I gave them a hardware wallet, and as they're doing their what's the form called for what's the financial? Thank you. As they do this every year and they file it, they have to report their unrealized gain, and they're looking at that every single time. And so I would challenge people that if you're concerned, if you're really attached to your church back in your local community, and you don't want to go in there with a pitch, right? I think you guys need to allocate whatever to this, and you have the means to make a donation in an amount that they're going to entertain the idea, right? I think it's a really powerful way to really kind of take on that indirect forced learning of what the heck is this that's sitting on my balance sheet. And I mean, it forces a person to go down that path to learn more. So it's been fun for both of us to kind of do that with the nonprofit. And I think it might work really well in some church settings as well.
I would add too, I mean, the average church in the world is about the same size as the average church as it's been through the history of the church. It's about 60 people. Most churches are very small. They're really struggling. It's kind of, bare survival type stuff. And so one thing I would say to you guys, y'all are really smart. You know a lot more than your pastors do about this stuff. Is just to be compassionate and loving and patient. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his little book on community, said something like, the one who loves his idea of the community more than the community itself actually destroys the community. And I think sometimes in our zeal for Bitcoin and for morality, we can sometimes love an abstract ideal more than the people that God's put in front of us. And we need to remember that Jesus loves these people, and Jesus died for these people. There's a part in the Gospels where it says Jesus got off the boat and he saw the crowds. And when I see a crowd of people, I groan and I just want to run away. But it says that Jesus had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And I think we probably, if we want to help our churches to hear us more and to care more about this stuff, I think we could probably do well to play the long game and the loving game and the patient game. It's hard to be a prophet, to speak truth to power, if you aren't also a priest, so to speak, kind of living among people and loving them and knowing that they know that you hear them, instead of just, hey, I have this new idea. And I mean, pastors all the time, people have some new crazy idea about what their churches should be doing, and they just roll their eyes at it, and they've heard it so many times. And so you got to be patient with it and loving.
That's an excellent point. And piggybacking on that, obviously there's a lot of FUD still around Bitcoin, a lot of uncertainty and doubt about what it is and what it can do. So I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on how do you approach a pastor or leaders, church leaders, or other Christian brothers and sisters about this topic?
I got this. No, well, pastors are just people, right? And so I have many friends who are pastors as well. And so they struggle with the same sort of things that we're struggling with, and they have their hearts are divided because they're concerned for their church members too. So they're trying to figure out how to best take care of their people, how to serve them with the love of Jesus. I think the thing that, and this is kind of getting back to what I was saying before and what we've been talking about, is because of the inherent policies of Bitcoin, as far as it being just basic, the programmed nature of Bitcoin is that it's perfectly scarce, it's going to appreciate and store your store of value, your purchasing power over the long run, over decades, over centuries. And so as Christians, what I tell people is this can free you from worrying about money. It can free you from constantly thinking about money. Again, getting back to this, if you're the pastor of a church or you're in church leadership, this is actually an issue that gets discussed on a regular basis. I come from a bigger church, and I know, it just depends on the size of your churches. Obviously, if it's a tiny church of 5 people, you're not talking about this as much. I come from a church with like 10,000 people in there, so obviously this is something that they're discussing frequently. It can free you from having to worry about this. It can free you from bonds that are depreciating and you're losing your purchasing power over time. So I would just encourage people to not be scared to talk to your pastors about that. If you know about Bitcoin, if you understand why it's better money, if you understand that it can take away your worry and just cause you to have peace about your financial situation, that is massive. And then you can actually focus on what's important, focus on the gospel, focus on getting the word out, focus on telling your neighbor about Christ. So to me, it's kind of simple, and don't be afraid to tell your pastor about it.
Yeah, I think you kind of mentioned this already, but one of the big things is this. Christians, I think, have the usual FUD that you hear everywhere, but you also have kind of these spiritual kind of angles on it, especially like you were saying with the kind of dirtiness of money that. And this is something that's been around for a very long time in the church, for thousands of years. There's something kind of inherently wrong about working in business or making money off of money or being kind of a middleman. And it's just a matter of, I think, really helping people teach about, the Bible teaches about money, and not just as a way that stay away from it, it's gross, but that this is something really important. And I think, that amazing parable in Luke 16 about the dishonest manager. And if Jesus was saying it today, he'd probably say, here's a parable about the Federal Reserve chairman who's ripping everybody off, and he's screwing over his boss and the people that he's supposed to be helping. And Jesus ends it, and he says, wow, isn't this great? Look at this guy. He really knows how to use money to have good relationships and to have influence on people. You stupid disciples of mine should learn from them and use money in a way that will help you get people into the kingdom, even though the money, of course, won't last. And I think just helping people to see, no, money is a wonderful tool that can do a lot of damage, but it's not inherently bad, and it's not wrong to talk about it. And it actually is one of the most important, significant gauges of where your heart is at spiritually, in terms of how you view your money and treat your money, and how much you worry about your money, and what that's saying about where your soul is at.
Excellent point. And to that, obviously, we constantly have to guard against the line of it becoming our focus, or a form of worship, an idol, right? And I think one of the things that we were pretty clear in the book is that this is not what we're doing with Bitcoin, or we should definitely guard against holding Bitcoin to that level of importance before Christ. So. But there's a fine line there, right? We're talking about how beneficial it can be for our financial positioning in the future and purchasing power long term.